Hi, welcome to Peer Supportcast. Today we are going to be talking about anxiety and the future. Today I have three lovely guests with me, Gerylaine, Campos, Kasper that you've seen in another episode, and Roan. So we're going to be discussing things such as anxiety that students feel when talking about career choices, but not only, we're also expectations, societal expectations that people have on students. We're also going to talk about the idea of purpose and meaning in what we do. And finally, we're also going to discuss eco-anxiety, which is a topic that is particularly relevant to our generation. So first of all, could you please introduce yourselves quickly? So your name and as well what you do. So Gerylaine, you're the Alumni and External Relations Officer at AUC. Could you please tell us more about what you do?
Yes, so I do a few different things at AUC. Most relevant in this context is that I manage our alumni relations. So I work with our alumni association and we organize events, but also do a lot of like relationship management stuff. And then I also coordinate the Masters in Career program. So that means figuring out what workshops and resources we can arrange for students, and then trying to make sure that they also have access to all of those things.
So you talk to students a lot on one-on-one?
Yes. Well, no, not one-on-one per se, in that sense. But we do have career coaching in the building.
Okay.
And so that's like a different specialty. They have like an organizational psychology background. So I more arrange all of the stuff rather than advise personally.
So it's more giving the resources for people to kind of like help them go through that transition.
Exactly. And also figuring out what is the right resource, what do people need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. What about you, Kasper?
So I'm Kasper. I'm the current co-chair of peer support. And I've been in the board for quite long. This is my fourth semester right now. My last semester too, super sad. Why I wanted to also partake in this conversation is because I've done some in the past semester I've done research about eco-anxiety among students at AUC. And how that can affect their academic performance and whether they want to be in this place and how they feel about it.
Yeah, well, I'm Roan. I'm the future co-chair of peer support. I've been on the board for half a year now. I'm a first year. I think I really was attracted to this topic because I think I personally have a lot of thoughts about the future, and I'm thinking about it a lot, and it's just guiding every choice I make, especially now that I'm looking at an exchange and like searching for internships and everything. It's been on my mind a lot, and I would love to talk about it now.
So as a first year, you were kind of in the beginning of this path of figuring out, especially at a university like AUC, where every single student has a different path and have so many options to choose. So you're in the middle of that, of making those choices, right? So do you feel like yourself and people around you, do you feel like those choices are triggering stress and anxiety around people within university? I think mostly first years who are, or do you think it's something that it's kind of you don't think about it actively in a way? It's just you kind of think about it every semester. Okay, what will I do on the next one, and then.
Wait 1 second. I really have to cough.
Go ahead.
I've had to do it for since you started the question, and I'm dying.
No worries.
I was like, oh God, please help me.
It happens a lot.
I'm not even a cougher.
I would say it's definitely a lingering thing, and it comes up every time you're making choices and things like that. And I think for some first years, it's not that big of a thing. They feel like everything's still very far. Yeah. I think that really is very dependent on the person. I, for example, really feel like the choices I make now are actually so much of a foundation of things I will end up choosing, even though maybe that's not actually true. It's a flawed thing. But because I'm also thinking ahead for masters, and because I am in the biomed and maybe even engineering field, there are like really special requirements I have to fulfill, and it's just it is stressful and something on my mind constantly. Yeah,
So
but once again, that's not the case for everyone.
But so you do feel like you do feel anxious because you feel like the choices you're making now are determining your future.
Yes, or limiting my future at least, like or maybe not even limiting, but I like to be at least somewhat efficient in the things I choose to do, and I think I don't want to end up wasting time doing something that I won't end up pursuing, even though I've been taking like performance arts music courses and linguistics, but still in the general sciences part I've been really selecting very consciously, and it's a lot.
And so I would like to now ask Gerylaine, who is, so you're more looking towards like you kind of have insights on kind of what happens to students after AUC. So I wanted to ask, because there's these concerns, right?
Mm-hmm.
How restricting are the choices that you make here, and how is it a comfortable transition to go from a field of study to another? How binding is your bachelor's degree in a way? If to a certain extent, of course, like I know it's not a black or white question, but maybe you can think of cases of you've seen people who have kind of shifted, or on the opposite, people who struggled because of that.
Mm-hmm. I think your stress and worries, I feel like a lot of people feel them as well. And it's, of course, very natural. A lot of times students who come to AUC are super driven and ambitious, and they just want to do a really good job. So you want to do a really good job with the courses that you select, and you want to make sure that they set you up for the future. But the truth is that so much can change between now and when you, in the end, apply for a master's. And it's impossible to know in the moment if the choices are right for you or not. And of course, there have been many people in the past who really believed that they wanted one specific path. And I can think of an example specifically. An alumnus went to study in Denmark, and they did a really quantitative master's, and they thought, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to work with quantitative research, work on environment. And when they got there, they realized that actually that program was really not a good fit for them. And then halfway through the program, they decided to do a completely different master's. So in some way, you could view that as a mistake or a failure. But actually, it was a lot of really valuable learning for that person, because in trying to do something that wasn't the right fit for them, they felt a lot more confident about going in a direction that was the right fit for them. And then after they did the master's, they ended up working as a policy officer, where their second master's came in handy, but the things they learned in their first master's also came in handy. So it's really hard to say whether you are making the right steps right now. For some studies, they do have a lot more specific requirements, like engineering, and it's good to keep that in mind. But it's also good to keep in mind that there isn't just one path to engineering. So if you're taking performance arts classes, and that's really enriching for you, and that's allowing you to be happier and be more present in your other courses, that's not a waste of time. That's a good use of your time, right? And you also never know, in the end, maybe you become an engineer, but even further along, let's say you go into management and you need to be able to speak publicly, or you need to use all of these other skills that you're gaining in other classes. So in that sense, it does determine somewhat, because some programs are more specific, but there are a lot of different paths to the programs, and it's not a waste of time to try different things. And I will also say, in terms of how to get in, programs will often advertise their entry criteria. That's stuff that you need to meet in order to enter the program. But there's another criteria, a selection criteria, and that's the admissions professionals. They go through all of the applications and they see them holistically. So it could happen that you meet literally every single criteria and you're still not selected for the program. Or it could happen that you're actually missing several criteria, but because you have a really good motivation, or because you have a really interesting profile, or because you have an interdisciplinary background, they still decide to give you a chance. So you can give yourself a better chance by meeting the criteria, but that's no assurance. And in the end, you should really follow, I think, your instinct in what you want to take, and not feel so much pressure to make perfect decisions, because there are no perfect decisions.
Yeah, because I'd like to add on to that in a little way. Because when I was listening to what you were saying before, I found it very interesting that you were sort of talking about these sort of notions of like wasting time and efficiency. And yeah, I just wanted to know, like, where do you think that sort of comes from? That you, have the feeling that it needs to be like that.
I think I just kind of need that because I have such, because I came to AUC with a pretty clear goal. Like I want to focus on biomedicine with some technological applications. So I'll need to take physics and math courses. It's pretty set. But then also I know for myself that I'll enjoy most things, which it's not quite the same as feeling like limitations. Like, oh, what if I end up doing something that I don't like? I like almost everything, and I'm happy doing almost every course. So, I try to actively think like, okay, what do I think makes the most sense for me? What do I think? I try to think in that kind of way for what makes most sense that I end up doing, and then I really need to impose these limitations because otherwise I can reach so far. Not that I don't do that at all, because obviously I'm taking courses also that I just think are so fun, and I think that does add a lot of it does add a lot of things that I cannot even imagine yet. But yeah, that's why I'm sometimes thinking in these terms of efficiency, and because I need that as a to shave down from all the potential things I can do. And that's otherwise it would be very overwhelming, I think.
It's very interesting because you say that since you like so many things, you don't feel like there's a really wrong answer. It's of course difficult because then you do have to kind of make a choice eventually. I'm the exact opposite, where growing up, I've always had this thing where I was never truly interested in any subject. Like I was, but purely out of genuine interest, and not interested in the career options that could go out of those fields, right? And so for me, it's always, rather than having it's almost like this overwhelming sensation is still there as well, precisely because you equally dislike most of the options, and then it's just as hard to make a choice. So for me, the solution for that was just trying the things that I knew the least about, and it definitely has had its good things and its bad things, because I still think I haven't found really like my career path in a way, but it's also, by trying things, it's also showing me what I don't like. So in a way, I still think like I'm moving forward. So moving on, I would like to ask you more specifically, Roan and Kasper, if you felt some sort of, did you feel pressure from your parents, from your friends, from society in general, on the career, on the academic tracks that you're taking right now, for example? Did you have to depart from certain pressures that you were under, or did you feel supported and kind of helped through when making your choices?
Well, I can say from the people around me, it's been always supportive, and even I think for example, my parents' perspective, it's almost like autopilot child, so I don't feel like I've ever been even guided, but definitely stimulated to think about things and to be critical, but never they never made any choices for me. I'd always had complete freedom, and any choice I made, which was intense, but it's I think a very nice thing.
Same. So I understand. What about you, Kasper?
I think for me too, I mean, out of the three of us, I'm probably like in the field that has like the least career opportunities.
Can I ask what it is?
I'm doing like anthropology and sociology, which is obviously something that still has opportunities, but it's, I guess, less paid and those kinds of things. But for me, it was really just working with my own sort of ethical sort of book, I guess, where it was just like balancing whether I wanted to, I guess, be happy or make more money. And that decision was quite easily made for me, where I'm just very much interested in society and just how people are oppressed and how we can sort of work around those things and come to a society and to a world where at least maybe for some it's a little bit better. And I guess in that way, sort of my perspective has been different over time, I guess. Because with anthropology, you're looking at this very narrow, small, sort of, very sort of bottom-up approach, where sociology is more top-down. But I think in that way, so AUC was perfect for me, that I could sort of combine the two and, see where do I sort of fit into that. But yeah, for me, my parents were always just supportive, and they just said, just do whatever makes you happy. And they knew that whatever I would do, I would work hard. And that's, I guess, for them, the most important, that they see that I'm doing something that I have a passion for and that I actually want to work hard for. And yeah, for me personally, that was okay. But obviously this sort of notion of, if I look at the future world, where can I sort of make money with, and what can I do to make sure that I have some sense of security, that did factor in. And that maybe for me was also a reason that I didn't just want to do anthropology and move a bit beyond that. Not that I think doing anthropology would be a wrong choice, but I guess that was sort of the decision that I had to make then. But I think it's also very different for everyone, and from which position of, I guess, privilege you come. I mean, I guess, especially right now, I have the privilege that my parents can help me with like paying tuition for me, but that also makes that I don't have that many debts coming out of my bachelor and those kinds of things. So that also gives me more freedom to actually choose something that isn't maybe the least sort of economically advantageable, if that's a word. So I guess there's also that sort of tension that's working in there. And in that sense, I've just been lucky. But yeah, I do want to recognize that that's also a very important thing.
I think it's good to recognize, because it can be really, so I'm Caribbean, I'm from Aruba, and it's really a different mentality as well when you're growing up with Caribbean parents. Mm-hmm. Not as supportive. But I think it's awesome that I see you guys given that space, and it's really interesting to see 3 completely different ways that space is then used.
Yeah. It's also nice, sort of highlights how there's no sort of fixed way to look at what you want to do, and we shouldn't think that everyone works in the same way, and that even though we sometimes might feel like within these larger structures of society where everything is about faster, do this, do that, make money, be technological, there can be ways and different ways that you individually can actually sort of take on that agency and say, well, actually, I want to do this, so I'm gonna. But there's obviously other restrictions in that.
I think like the most pressure that I felt, for me, it was not from friends or parents, but it was from like the school system I was in. So I was so I always went through French education, but I did it abroad. I was in Barcelona, and it really very much. So first of all, there was this distinction between majors already. I don't know how it works in the Netherlands, but so we had already sciences, social sciences, and humanities, and there was this thing where the smart ones went to sciences, and then the party people went to social sciences. There was this kind of unwritten hierarchy, and there was a lot of pressure around it. I think it really dictated a lot of your social interactions, and so for me, for example, I took sciences because it was just like the natural thing to do if you had good grades. And I think for me, like I said before, since I wasn't really interested in anything looking at like career choices, for me it was more what are the easiest subjects for me, so that I don't have to struggle throughout my throughout high school. And then it really felt like as we got closer and closer to graduation, there was very few choices that were presented to us in all the workshops. And it's like the school, and because they wanted to have a record of, you know, successful people that come out of the school. I really felt like I was presented with three choices: being a doctor, being an engineer, or being I don't know, work in business or finances, and that was very restricting. And I feel like thankfully I had a lot of support from my parents to kind of, I don't know, step out of that. I think I didn't fully step out of that because and right now I'm in the economics track. So I was doing sciences, and then I decided to come here and experiment with economics, but I came to UC so that I could experiment with other things, learn about social sciences, etc. So yeah, I feel like a lot of pressure is more institutional.
Yeah, I think that's the case too in the Netherlands. I mean, I think these sort of, if we're talking about these decisions and these things that feel so sort of, defining for what you're going to be later in your life, in the Netherlands, that happens so early on already. When you're 12, your teacher decides this is the level that you can do in high school, and that's just where you're going to go. And then only if you do the highest level, you can get into university. And obviously there's these other paths that you can then take to actually get to university from the other levels, but it just takes much more time. And then even within the higher level, there's also this sort of notion of these 4 tracks where some are perceived as better and for the smarter people than the other tracks. So in that way, when you then do, for instance, cultuur en maatschappij or culture and society, which I did, I combined it with one of the nature, like sciencey tracks as well, because I was scared that I wouldn't have any career opportunities left. So that early, when I was 15, I already had those sort of tensions. Then it's sort of stigmatized as that being something for the dumb people, even though, and then when you look at sort of the requirements for even getting into a bachelor, you also have way less opportunities when you choose that specific track. So in that way, while it's good to recognize, you do have that free choice, there is this reality of there are certain doors that seem to close. But then I know a lot of friends that also took a different route and then said, well, I'm just going to take this extra course and then I will meet the requirements for my bachelor. And you can do the same thing for masters as well. There's pre-master tracks and those kinds of things where your bachelor isn't defining if you can get into it. You can do these other paths, but then you have to, at least take some time. And then obviously if you have these ideas where time, like taking your time and giving yourself that space is a bad thing, then that becomes very difficult. And that's also a very real thing to feel. So you have to sort of balance and find your own sort of path within that. But that's a very difficult thing to do.
So the anxiety, so coming back to kind of the main topic of anxiety in the future, a lot of the anxiety is also caused by this pressure of time that applies to many things in your life. It doesn't only apply to career choices, but as we're just entering your 20s, Roan, you're 19, right? We have this. It's a period of our lives where we have to keep moving forward a lot, and there's expectations on us. There's these like, you have to get married by that year, by that age. You have to I don't know, buy a house, buy your first car, like do all these things, and I guess it also applies to you should be done with your masters by when you're 23, or like you can't take time for example, a gap year is something that can be very difficult to talk about in certain families. I will not enter into details of that because that's a whole different discussion. But
and also at AUC itself, you can it is possible to take a fourth year, you know, or at least a seventh semester. But that, I feel at least, is also something that people don't want to consider, because that's also a feeling of failing in that way. Even though if you just need it, why wouldn't you? I know a bunch of friends of mine are doing it, and they're really happy to make that decision, because then at least, yeah, you're taking a bit longer, but then in those times you can actually focus more on what you're learning, and you don't have to sort of always have this thing in the back of your mind, oh, I need to reach this specific level, otherwise I'm going to fail, and then I'm not going to get my bachelor's degree, you know? Yeah. But then again, it's this notion of, do I feel like I deserve that time to just do it in a way where I can feel proud of myself, you know? I don't know. It's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Having seen it on the other side, I mean, students graduate from AUC so young. 21 probably doesn't feel that young now, but 21 is so young. And in a master's, you will meet very many people who haven't just taken a gap year, but have had a whole career and are coming back to their master's, and they're maybe in their 30s. Some might have children. Some might decide to want to do a completely different direction, and that's why they're doing a master's. So, you know, if you feel like going into your master's as a 23-year-old, you're the old one, not at all. You're going to be the little baby, like I promise. So, you know, if that's the feeling like, oh, I need to go straight into after my bachelor's, you can if you want to. I did that as well. But if you don't, you're not the standout at all. Yeah. And if anything, it just makes you an even stronger candidate, because you're coming into it with a little bit more life experience. You've tried out different things. You're choosing for it maybe with a bit more mental space than if you were choosing for it while you're also finishing your studies here. So I completely understand, because it's so hard when everyone is kind of echoing that same pressure and you're all the same age and no one has seen the other side. So it really becomes like an echo chamber. Maybe I can just, you know, pipe into the echo chamber and say that I promise you do have time. Yeah.
It's actually quite funny, because I have these feelings and these ideas, but then also I have the example of my mother, who, by the way, just called me and made me think of it, who at, well, an old age, 50, is returning back to education and is taking a master's in law. Actually, she finished her bachelor last year. Wow. Because she never wrote her thesis. So she thought, okay, I'm going to do something relevant and write my thesis on AI and skin cancer detection. And it's actually something that I should really take with me, and that I haven't been even considering these flexibilities and these also the new opportunities that just I don't think a change in culture is providing, from being able to come back to education and, you know, go down an entirely different direction.
Yeah.
She's calling me again.
She really wants to share her personal experience.
Yes, she clearly does.
That'd be so fun. Yeah, so I would like to, just for a moment, move out of the career topic.
Yes.
And move more to maybe something more philosophical and more broad. I wanted to talk about, because I feel like a lot of the anxiety comes from like an idea of purpose that we all try, that not precisely we don't all try to find, but there's this pressure that you need to, like, you have a purpose, and or that you need to find meaning in what you do. So I wanted to ask everyone here if you relate to that or not, in what ways, and how important it is for you that what you do in the future is meaningful to you or to others. Because I also wanted to talk about this trade-off that, for example, Kasper was mentioning about, I want to be successful. First of all, how do you define success? Second of all, does that imply making money? How willing are you to trade finding meaning in what you do for, I don't know, financial stability?
Yeah.
All these things.
Yeah, I think, as I already said, because I at least think I'd be satisfied in so many different situations. I really have to shave down, and I do so in a way that is yeah, almost not necessarily what I'd be happiest with, but the thing that I can find the most backing for, the thing I can, and then that leads back to happiness, because I'd be satisfied doing something that I can find, which something that narratively almost makes sense. And yeah, for me, that just kind of brought me to the field of health and medicine, because I can very easily, also taking my own history, I can very easily warrant going down that path, which might sound a bit insane, but I personally need that, that I need that satisfaction knowing that the thing I did kind of makes sense on a broader scale, considering my own history. And I know that's not the same for everyone. I think actually I might be one of the outliers on that, but maybe someone else can relate or not.
I mean, I think sort of the whole motivation behind studying what I am studying is that I want it to be something meaningful, and I want to have, at least for myself, but also to people around me or whatever, I want to be part of some specific change, because I am someone who, I think about like political and these social issues very often, and in that way I'm sort of emotionally connected to them as well. And I'm really very dissatisfied with how the world is going. And I don't know, I think for me, well, yes, I think there's this sort of trend of everyone wanting to move towards these sort of technological and these sort of scientific, really sort of progression, growing sort of movements. And I think within my studies, and just because that's my sort of general belief, I want to be part of some sort of progression, but not necessarily of growth in that regard. I can't really sort of pinpoint it now exactly, but I think I just want to reconsider what we perceive as progression within the world. And I think what we can see when we look at environmental issues and other social problems, that we have sort of equated progression and growth to be the same thing, which has just very detrimental consequences for the world, because at some point growth is not possible anymore. And then what do? Then we have to look beyond the earth, but then we're just going to destroy the whole earth. Is that what we want to do? So I think within that, there's obviously these other more technological perspectives you could take, but for myself, because I know that that's something I also excel at, I want to look at how can we as people think about these things, and how can we think about just creating more awareness for reconsidering the way we look at the world and the way we look at progression, and in that way hopefully at least address some of the societal structures and consequent issues that are happening right now. But obviously that's also some sort of glorified idea in my brain, but yeah, I think I need to have that idea of meaning.
Exactly.
Don't be afraid to have that.
Yeah, no, but I also think it's one of the reasons why I'm so motivated to keep working and to try to excel. But if we then look at this notion of success, what does that mean? I think that's a very good question that you ask, because what is told to us is success means making money, and success means being like these figures we see everywhere in the media, people with these large houses. And for me, that isn't necessarily what success means. I think success for me means, yes, obviously having that financial security that I don't have to worry, but other than that, actually creating meaning for myself and for the people around me, and at least from some sort of bottom-up approach, trying to maybe work at some NGO where we actually, at least for some people, can try to alleviate and improve their experience in the world. So that's why I sort of wanted to take that social approach. But yeah, I think it's a very good, important balance to talk about meaning and success, and how, why they are maybe sometimes perceived as the same, while they are, but also they don't have to be, especially if you take success to be a financial thing. Yeah.
I mean, it's such a broad thing that, like, for example, if your idea of success is not only financial freedom, but let's say being very comfortable financially, but also being comfortable with your time, then those things can clash, because a lot of let's say high responsibility, high paid jobs can come with a lot of time constraints, constraints in terms of where you live or how much you have to move around, and also a lot of risk taking, which is something that can affect a lot your stress levels in general and your overall well-being. So those are all things to consider as well. But I would like to bounce back on what you said, because it's a very good way to you kind of started opening up the discussion about the environment, and you were talking about how you're dissatisfied with the direction our world is taking. Do you feel anxious about not only the future of the planet in terms of environment, but also our future as a species? Is that something that you think about actively? And does that impact your decisions, not only on a daily basis, but maybe your decisions for the future? Because I imagine when we thought that cigarettes were healthy, for example, it was because it was advertised as medication. It was probably an honorable thing to do, to pursue a career in the tobacco business, in the tobacco industry. But then I feel like the more aware you are about certain things, and the more you try to find meaning as well, then those can actually be restricting for your choices in life, because if you're trying to follow some ethics, a certain level of ethics in ethicality in your ways of work, then there's a lot of careers that you should not consider.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's complicated. I mean, to some extent, I think if you try to only live perfectly according to your ethics, that's super constricting, because oftentimes there are what's the slogan, like there's no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, that can be so overwhelming to only try to be perfect, and the impact is a lot bigger if you try your best and then spread that out as far as you can.
Yeah.
And so it can be, for example, that maybe your job is not at an environmental NGO, but you can still have impact if you're, for example, someone who's active in your community, or if you are always voting in local government, or if you are, working on awareness campaign like within your own circle. So I think it's really important to be guided by your ethics in your life, but not to see work as the only avenue.
Definitely.
And also not to be a perfectionist about it, in the sense that you can do the very best you can. Mm-hmm. But if you're only going to be happy with perfect, then you will never be happy, So
you are not what you do. It's more about your role as a citizen globally, rather than your occupation that you should take, where you should express your ethics.
I mean, we feel these pressures of having to live like the most sustainable life ever and have the most perfect way of consumption that exists, so we don't create further issues for the environment. Well, that can actually be something that restricts you, because it can also lead to you not being able to actually fulfill your what you would like sort of to address in your job. My brain doesn't really work in the moment, but when I was talking to the students in this specific project that are actually sort of centralizing their studies at AUC on environmentalism, what I heard from these people was that they usually come in with these sort of very big ideas of this individual responsibility of, I need to do these things through my studying. I need to be the person who's going to change things. And learning about those things and then realizing, well, actually, there's so many structures that are set in place. They at least will not change in the foreseeable future. That can be a sort of very depressing thing that you then feel as well. And that can also then sort of change the way you might perceive your future career and whether it even makes sense in that way. So I think hearing from these students and hearing that for every single person that came here, they were super optimistic, and then they turned into a much more pessimistic person who had all these feelings of eco-anxiety, but also of other eco-emotions, which have also been researched, like eco-anger and eco-frustration and those things. They can have severe consequences also for your motivation to keep studying those things. And that is a very difficult thing to balance. And I have experienced it myself as well when I took this class about very extensive discussions about racism and how it's so pervasive in the Netherlands. And that can also just give you such a feeling of hopelessness. And that can also feel like such a personal, individual burden that you have to carry around and that you have to deal with. And for me as well, it sometimes also just gives me the feeling of, does it even have any meaning what I'm doing? And can it actually change anything? And that is a very difficult thing to balance. So yeah, to sort of conclude my monologue, I think these anxieties about climate change and just other social issues that can be even sort of perpetuated while you're studying, they do very much influence as well how you perceive what is meaning and what meaning you want to occupy or at least create within the world. And it makes it also much more difficult to then say, what am I going to do as a master's? Will my contribution do anything? Yeah. And it's something so difficult to deal with, especially in the social sciences. I don't know how that is maybe in the sciences, maybe you have some insights about that, but yeah, there are just these very big sort of conundrums that, there really aren't that many solutions for that can be generalized, and it's such an intense experience that you have to go through individually.
Yeah. What you said about this like individual weight you feel, it feels like such a ploy to have that, especially when it comes to, for example, having these students that are very involved in environmental studies or want to pursue that future, and them becoming bitter because they realize how little they might be able to change. It's such a ploy. It feels like that you'll have such individual burdens to carry when it's not like that. It's simply not at such an individual scale. It's not, these processes don't play out at such a small scale even. But yeah, with regards to wanting to do something that will change, that will make better, wanting to find purpose, I think maybe it's something relevant to discuss the future of automation and increasingly having these algorithms, machine learning algorithms that can really fulfill almost every position. And Woo. It can be a very bitter future, knowing that simply it's the economical decision to have things be automated and thus have the individual I personally don't think it's a bitter thing. I think we can really automate a lot of things and find purpose in new things, and it can actually even be a beneficial thing. But that's really depends on where these systems take us. How much maybe these systems will allow us to even distance ourselves from this, idea of progress and this idea of continual development. If we all are not very into that system anymore, we can kind of distance ourselves from it. Because, for example, within my field, I might end up wanting to do something very numerical. Now, that's the first things to go, like having to do data analysis. It's not even a thing anymore, basically. So still, I park it. Yeah, I have that. I know I have that knowledge that these things are going to be automated, and I think even that's not even unique to numerical things. I think it's really human wide. For anything that we do, it can be automated. Just it's a matter of time. And it may be a bit depressing.
I love science.
Yes. And it's also maybe interesting to think about what these things exist. That's just simply the way things are. People like to discover new things, whether it be just because they're interested or because they think it will bring them financial success. Do you think that if these tools exist and because people want to have that purpose, do you think they'll be utilized? Do you think that there is a space maybe for people that want to live another way of life, that want to distance themselves from these things and live in kind of bliss, knowing these things exist, but we'll do our little human thing and continue working hard?
Okay, so I just want to say I've wrote my thesis on the topic.
Okay, perfect.
So I wrote my thesis on, more specifically, because automation is not something new at all. But I feel like the anxiety that a lot of us are feeling is because with artificial intelligence and newest forms of automation, it's cognitive tasks that are being threatened with quotation marks, because then there's a lot of debate around that, because we feel like what makes us inherently human is our capacity to be creative and to make these cognitive actions, right? If we feel like the thing that we will never be replaced from is, let's say, artistic expression, for example. But now there's a lot of with deep learning algorithms that are capable of reproducing many styles of paintings, and just actually
even singing,
literally,
like they can automate someone's voice, like an artist's voice, to sing a song they have never sung.
That's creepy.
It's really strange.
Which poses a lot of problems for accountability, like transparency as well. There's a lot of problems that arise from that, but that's like a whole different discussion. But what I wanted to say is, so we have this fear, right, that we will, like, humans will not have value as a workforce, but automation has. But we think this way because it's starting to affect cognitive tasks, whereas when it was affecting, affecting more like. I don't know, when the cashier was replaced at Albertine. Mm-hmm. I guess it's less scary because you can more easily redirect the person towards new jobs. But when it's starting to when the most complex tasks are being replaced, you start to fear the role of human.
This motion from like more physical things that are being replaced to like cognitive.
Yeah, but things, it's important to note that not everything is automated. There's like also the notion of which extent it is automated, because there's also technologies that will augment jobs. So without replacing it, you there's a lot of technologies. For example, how AI is used right now, a lot of it is simplifying repetitive tasks for a lot. It's used a lot in administrative things. So it's just cutting a lot of in the time that you spend doing these things, but you still need people to execute those things. And what is very important that is not talked about is the thing that happens with technology in general. With technological progress, there's always task creation. So artificial intelligence and all these like scary technologies are creating a lot of jobs as well, a lot of job opportunities, because you need people to, first of all, develop these technologies. You need people to kind of train them, to perfect them, because right now, if you think about chatbots or, you know, like customer service AIs, they're far from perfect, and you need people to teach these AIs how to get closer and closer to real interactions between people, so that they can satisfy their purpose, which they're not right now. You need people to be able to explain those algorithms and be the bridge between let's say politicians or business leaders and the science itself behind the algorithms. Because if an algorithm makes a mistake, you need someone, and you have to, and someone suffers the consequences from that. You need someone to be able to explain that to an average person that doesn't have any knowledge on programming. And finally, you also need it. There's also a lot of ethical implications within it, and therefore, there might be an increase in the need of philosophers and ethics specialists, because people. I mean, it's currently the case. People teach algorithms what is good and wrong. Mm-hmm. If ChatGPT never says, or almost never says, controversial things, is because there's someone behind teaching the algorithm to take out all these controversial answers from its baggage of possible answers, you know.
But there's a few things I would like to say to that, if that's okay. I think what I'm noticing, and I also would like to draw that back to sort of AUC specifically, but within that, yes, there are jobs that are being created, but there's also a lot of jobs that are disappearing. Those are usually jobs for people that have not enjoyed or like the education that we are enjoying. And moreover, if you have ChatGPT who can just write essays and those kinds of things, a lot of social scientists and those people, and even people in the humanities, maybe aside from like philosophers who think about ethics, are also losing those kinds of jobs. And society's refocused again to just be about science and sort of technology in that way. So it's interesting to see how that's also mirrored within AUC, where there's these plans to reduce the amount of students in the social sciences and humanities to become more of a science college, right? And I think that is, especially in AUC, also something that is really playing where, at least myself, I am also afraid of like, and maybe you can say something about that, like what will my degree, social sciences degree, mean from AUC when in the future AUC is going to be something that is much more centered towards sciences, will like being at least, like how does those sort of things interplay?
Maybe not the answer you're expecting, but usually at the point of your career, if you have a master's, your bachelor doesn't matter that much.
That's fair. But even then, if like people later who also will maybe still do social sciences and humanities here, when that is happening, maybe that will also give them anxiety in that way.
But by the way, I think the notion that sciences jobs won't be replaced to the same extent that social sciences might be, it's I think flawed. I think maybe it's even the other way around, because you know people want that human face as like policymakers. They want them as people, you know, writing critical articles. You don't necessarily need a human to do a cancer detection research. You can have two AI interact with each other and they don't even need any input. And actually with time, you can have a general intelligence that just behaves exactly like a human learning process would. And you can have two interacting like, okay, the idea is to solve problems. You know, you're solving problems and it's just done, right? It's a hands-off process. They think in the same way that humans do. Their networks, their neural networks represent our brains, except they do things faster and more efficiently, and things just big system scale thinking already takes place because there are 7 billion people that each interact with each other. We have this notion of individuals, but at the end of the day, we're operating already as at a much larger human scale, right? So.
But that can be true for all three disciplines.
Also, I wanted to play in what you said, that people's jobs being taken, and they are taking our jobs and they're taking our purpose. But I don't think that's, once again, a negative thing. I think that having our purpose be jobs has always been like kind of a misconception. It feels almost a bit small scale, silly, and not that any human purpose isn't small scale, because of course the skill that we identify our purpose with can be at any skill, and that's an individual thing. But it's always been trying to find the word for it. I think, in my opinion, it's always been a flawed idea that we can find any purpose in one preset thing. So if there's no job, say, there's no productivity needed, everything is automated, and how do we operate in life? We just exist, and we exist for our own pleasure. Maybe even, I think we exist for our own pleasure. Then we exist for, maybe we find pleasure in other things. That would be ideal. Then we interact with each other. But if there's nothing that we need to do, nothing we need to get done, how do we operate? Because I think that future is likely. I think it's maybe not necessarily within our lives, maybe within our lives, depends on how things accelerate. But I think the space for thinking about things like that, finding purpose when there is quite literally nothing that needs to be done. Because I think the idea of having things need to be done in the first place is already very, problematic, because we can just not do anything, and it really depends on your ideology. I really do notice it here, but it's there's no need for doing things. It's really what we set ourselves. When there is actually like a fundamentally agreed upon thing that, okay, we don't need to do these things to survive, to live, then where do we find purpose? Do we find purpose in family? Maybe that even becomes, do we just take a lot of dopamine medication that just makes us, this is a very negative future, but then might become a human cycle of taking dopamine medication, things, or drugs, essentially, is what I'm saying. You take a lot of drugs, but then also you have these counter things where, okay, you have to do a tolerance break. You're just going up and down of scales of extreme euphoria and going down into very deep a deep plunge. And I think that is a likely future, because then you have people that, experience happiness, even though it's not for anything. It's just, they experience happiness within their brain, and there is no purpose because, that's not a thing that exists.
I just want to quickly say that. No. I mean, it's very interesting, and I actually agree on one aspect, which is that it's an exciting thing to think that jobs and occupations which are so inherently at the core of our lives currently might not be in the future. I think that's something that's super hopeful to look forward to, because as like humanity can have much more purpose then, and we can redefine the nature of a lot of things that we do, and find meaning in different ways. But I mean, it would imply a lot of changes in institutional change, and simply like our financial systems need consumption, and we still need people. Let's say that, I mean, that's an entirely different conversation, so I'm really not going to talk about it right now, but the future that you talk about, where nothing needs to be done, right now we're not ready for it. Like there would be a significant amount of change that would need to happen, so that, because right now it's an expected thing. But what I wanted to say is, we're cutting close to the end of the episode, first of all. There was so many points that.
My
What?
mind is so blown with this
Yeah.
dopamine.
Oh, I remembered
This
what I wanted to say.
regimen.
Don't you think we're actually living this right now? Because we don't need to do all these things to survive. We have access to food. We produce plenty enough food to erase world hunger. We just don't because of the way our things are.
But that's also the thing I would say. I think if we look at the future in such a way, I think it's just not realistic. Just because humans will continue to be menaces and just be hateful, you know? Like, I don't think there will still be social hierarchies, and will still be so much inequality. Like, if you say I'll just be high on dopamine, then probably like there will be a way where they say, well, only the rich people, or only not maybe then rich. But also, like, I don't feel like the market will disappear then, but that's a whole nother. This is a whole nother conversation, and it's all just very speculative. So I don't really know if it has a lot of meaning for this specific podcast. But
Yeah.
I think there will still then be ways found where there will be social hierarchy and social inequality. So then it will still be a way, like something that can divide people. And if we say like, oh, are we already living in that society? Maybe us, but if you look at people that don't have the advantages that people in the West have, or at least us being in the West and also having the financial security to be able to go to university. I mean, if you look at people that are still, like, what we've done is just outsource the production of goods and of clothing to other countries. But so we are not doing that anymore, but people in the global South are. So I definitely don't think that we are living in that society now. And I also don't feel like even if we would automate it like that, it would necessarily be implemented everywhere at the same time. But I think it's important maybe that we just revert back to some of the questions that you might still have about like the specific context, like the questions that are relatable to us now instead of in the
I want to
far
say
future.
one final thing about the very existential thing. It's it's just something that I used, even these possibilities of a future to relativize my current decisions, like, because these things can carry so much weight in all of us that even thinking of the future, and we have the elements ready that such a future might be possible, it helps me to relativize my decisions, and that they might not carry as much weight as they might have in my head at the moment.
So
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, in my brain, that future is really something I do not want to be in. So for me, that's a very stressful thing to think about. But I guess that's then also everyone's personal experience.
Yeah.
So to conclude this podcast, why, if you had to give an advice to people on how to cope with anxiety regarding the future, so that involves anxiety, fear of technology, and also making the right choices, like academic and career choices, how do you help? Let's say, how would you go about advising someone and helping them deal with their anxiety, their anxious feelings about the future?
I think I would say, I mean, I've had some conversations with people about this as a peer supporter, where they did feel very anxious because they weren't maybe getting the grades they thought they were going to get. And then they felt a lot of pressure from back home that they had to excel. And then that can just be a lot of stress in that way. But I think for that person, obviously, it was already a big step that they wanted to come to me and talk about it. But I think with most of these things, it's just really good to talk about them with people. But I recognize that that's a very difficult thing to do. But I think, and I hope maybe peer support can be a place where we can do that again in the future. I know in the past we've tried to sort of open up the discussion about eco-anxiety so we can be there for each other and we can maybe cope together in a way. And when I was talking to the people in the study I did, they also mentioned very similar things where they would really like to together just talk about it and not even solve the anxiety that they might have, because that's an unrealistic thing, but at least not feel alone in it. And I think that's a very powerful thing we can do here at AUC, where we are in some ways sort of close-knit community, at least for some. And I think we can find a lot of strength in like community action and just expressing how we feel. And I guess I hope that peer support can be in the future board can be something where we can try to create that space for community where there's that sense of comfort to talk about how we feel, because obviously it's not something that you can easily do because it is a very personal thing. But I think conversation is something very important. But that obviously also comes from my own perspective, and there might also be a lot of people that just like to keep it to themselves, and that's also totally fine if you feel like that you have a different way to sort of deal with those things. But I think it's very important that we all try to think about and at least find a way where we can sort of channel those emotions and at least not suppress them, and maybe make them apparent in some way, or at least deal with them in some way. But that's also me, maybe.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.